It was supposed to be just another peaceful afternoon. The sun was filtering through the curtains. My daughter was humming along to her favorite cartoon. And for once, everything felt calm. My daughter, she's 10, gentle, disabled, and one of the purest souls I've ever known. Despite everything she's been through, she smiles at strangers, waves at neighbors, and finds joy in the tiniest things, like the way light dances on the wall or the sound of birds in the morning. We moved here for a fresh start, hoping this neighborhood would be a safe space for her. But we didn't count on Karen. Karen is the kind of person who believes the entire world should bend to her will. She's the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the type who measures grass with a ruler and files complaints over holiday decorations being too colorful. From day one, she made it clear we didn't belong, especially my daughter. It was subtle at first. Cold stares, passive-aggressive notes, and fake smiles that vanished the second you turned away. I chalked it up to the usual neighborhood drama. I never imagined it would turn violent. But one day, when I was out for just a few minutes, Karen entered our home. Not with permission, not with reason. And what she tried to do to my daughter in those moments, I can barely speak the words. She dragged her toward the ceiling fan and wrapped a cord around her hands. She actually tried to hang my child, my disabled, defenseless little girl. And 5 minutes later, Karen was in handcuffs. This is the story of how a power-hungry woman's hatred exploded into violence, and how a little girl's innocence and a mother's fury brought it all crashing down. We moved into the neighborhood full of hope. After years of navigating a world that often felt too loud, too fast, and too indifferent to people like my daughter, we thought we had finally found a place of peace. The house was modest, but warm, with a wide living room that gave her space to play, and a quiet backyard where she could sit and draw. It had everything we needed, especially the silence, the sense of safety, and the opportunity to rebuild. She was thrilled about her new room, decorated with stars and fairy lights, and she smiled for days about the ramp we had installed at the front door. It was hers, her space, her home, her sanctuary. Karen made her presence known the moment the moving truck arrived. She didn't offer a welcome or introduce herself like the other neighbors. Instead, she came marching down the street with a clipboard in hand, frowning as she glanced at the ramp. I remember her words so clearly it still makes my skin crawl. "That ramp's not HOA approved," she said, not even bothering to make eye contact. I tried to explain that it was medically necessary, legally compliant, and essential for my daughter's access. She didn't care. She just walked away muttering something about standards. At first, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just particular. Maybe she had a hard day. But that illusion vanished quickly. She started showing up more often, usually under the guise of routine HOA inspections. But it was always our home she zeroed in on. My daughter once waved at her from the porch with her crayon-covered hands, eager to say hello. Karen didn't wave back. She didn't even smile. She just turned her head and walked away like my daughter didn't exist. That moment stung more than I expected. I saw confusion flicker across my child's face, followed by sadness. She didn't understand why someone wouldn't wave back. Still, I told myself things would settle down. I told myself not to overthink, but in my gut, I knew something was off. Karen wasn't just unfriendly. She was watching us, judging, measuring. And deep down, I feared that this woman, this self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood order, had made us her personal target. It didn't take long before the cold glares and silence turned into something darker. At first, it was the constant letters from the HOA, all signed anonymously, but with a tone that screamed, "Karen." One claimed our trash bins were left out an unacceptable number of minutes past pickup time. Another accused us of having unsightly medical equipment visible from the street. That equipment, by the way, was my daughter's wheelchair ramp, a lifeline for her independence. Every week it was something new, always petty, always unnecessary, but each one chipped away at our sense of safety. Karen didn't stop there. She began walking past our house multiple times a day, her phone always in hand, snapping pictures of our yard, our porch, even our windows. She claimed it was for documentation, but it felt invasive, like surveillance. She would linger near our property line, pretending to inspect shrubs or the sidewalk, but I could feel her eyes scanning every detail. My daughter started noticing too. One day she asked me, "Mum, why does that lady always look angry at our house?" I didn't have a good answer. It escalated further when Karen began filing noise complaints. My daughter, who has a joyful habit of laughing loudly when watching her favorite cartoons, suddenly became the target of those reports. We were accused of disturbing the peace. The irony of someone complaining about a disabled child's laughter was almost too cruel to process. Even her television volume became a problem. Karen once left a handwritten note on our door that read, "This is a community, not a daycare. Control your child." The parking space near our unit became another battleground. I have a modified van that accommodates my daughter's wheelchair, and it requires extra clearance to safely load and unload her. Karen knew this. Still, she began parking her car just close enough to make it difficult for me to open the ramp. She'd stand nearby and smirk while I struggled. One time, she even muttered, "Maybe this neighborhood isn't the right fit for everyone." What started as passive aggression had clearly evolved into something more deliberate, more venomous. And though I didn't yet know how far Karen would go, I was starting to realize that this wasn't about rules or aesthetics. It was about control. And she wanted us gone. Karen didn't just enjoy the rules, she lived for them. It was like she breathed regulation and exhaled control. As a senior member of the HOA board, she wielded her authority like a weapon, not a responsibility. While others on the board seemed disinterested or too tired to push back, Karen thrived in that power vacuum. She wrote the newsletters, conducted surprise inspections, and decided what color your mailbox could be. Her word wasn't just suggestion, it was treated as law. She presented herself as a guardian of neighborhood standards, but what she really guarded was her dominance. You could see it in the way she corrected people in public, interrupted at meetings, and dismissed any concern that didn't come from someone she deemed respectable. That usually meant someone who looked like her, spoke like her, and acted exactly how she wanted. Anyone outside that narrow box became a problem to solve or eliminate. Over time, her obsession turned more personal. She stopped hiding her contempt for my daughter. If we were outside playing, Karen would stare from her porch, arms crossed, phone in hand. Once, she told another neighbor, loud enough for me to hear, that some people are turning this place into a charity ward. Another time, when my daughter was drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk, Karen came over and hosed them off. When I confronted her, she claimed it was graffiti and told me I should keep better supervision over her. Neighbors stopped speaking up. They feared retaliation. Karen had fined people for having lawn ornaments, for painting a shed without approval, even for hanging seasonal decorations too early. People learned to stay quiet. And that silence empowered her. She didn't just think she was above the rules, she believed she was the rules. And anyone who challenged that illusion, especially someone like my daughter, became a threat to be erased. It started like any other quiet Saturday. The morning sun poured into the living room, and my daughter sat cross-legged on the floor with her sketchbook, drawing her favorite cartoon characters. She was humming, lost in her little world of imagination, her crayon-streaked fingers moving with joy. I remember thinking how peaceful the house felt. After a rough week of dodging Karen's complaints and side eyes, this calm was a gift. I needed to pick up a prescription from the pharmacy and grab some groceries. Our caregiver was home and just needed to take a quick call outside in the driveway. It didn't seem like a big deal. 5 minutes, 10 at most. My daughter knew not to answer the door, and our street was usually quiet. But that day, Karen must have been watching. According to the security footage we later reviewed, Karen waited no more than 30 seconds after our caregiver stepped out before approaching. She didn't knock. She tried the doorknob. When it didn't open, she used something from her pocket. To this day, I don't know if it was a spare key she shouldn't have had, or if she picked the lock. Either way, she walked into our home like she owned it. My daughter, trusting and unaware of danger, looked up from her drawings and smiled. She knew Karen by face, had seen her around, and had never been told outright that this woman could be dangerous. When Karen said she needed help with the ceiling fan in the living room, my daughter nodded and followed her. It breaks me to imagine those first moments. My daughter must have been so confused, maybe thinking it was some kind of game, maybe thinking she was helping. She didn't scream right away. But what happened next changed everything. Karen closed the door behind her, locked it, and pulled something from her coat, a length of cord. Then she turned to my daughter with a look that could only be described as hollow and cold. By the time our caregiver came back inside, the house was silent. Too silent. She called out, got no answer, and that's when she stepped into the living room and saw what no one should ever have to see. The innocence of the day shattered in a single, unthinkable moment. Karen stood in the middle of our living room with the cord in her hands, her eyes fixed on my daughter in a way that made it clear something inside her had snapped. My daughter, still unsure of what was happening, had frozen in place. There was no laughter anymore, no humming, no crayons in her hand. Just confusion. Fear hadn't even fully set in yet. That came moments later, when Karen told her, in an icy voice, "You don't belong here. You're ruining this neighborhood. I'm going to fix it." Then she moved toward her. My daughter tried to step back, but Karen grabbed her by the arm with surprising force. The cord, thick, like an extension cable, was looped and already knotted at one end. Karen wrapped it quickly around my daughter's wrists, pulling them together. My daughter screamed then, a sharp, panicked cry that cut through the air like glass. She cried out for me, for her mum. Her voice cracked, and she began to sob, pleading in that innocent, trembling way only a child can. But Karen wasn't moved. Her face stayed calm, her hands steady. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She acted like someone following a plan. She dragged my daughter toward the ceiling fan, yanking her by the bound wrists. My daughter's legs gave out, and she was half dragged, half lifted across the carpet. Karen pulled a chair underneath the fan and stepped up, reaching to loop the cord over one of the blades. She actually believed she could lift my daughter by her wrists, tie her to the fan, and leave her there. As if that would make her disappear. As if that would make the neighborhood pure in her eyes again. The ceiling fan swayed as Karen worked. She struggled with the knot, muttering angrily under her breath. My daughter kicked her legs, trying to get free. The sounds coming from her, fear, pain, confusion, haunt me to this day. She was trying to breathe through sobs, trying to understand why someone she had seen every day was now hurting her, trying to end her. And that's when the front door burst open. Our caregiver, hearing the scream and sensing something was horribly wrong, hadn't hesitated. She'd thrown down her phone, shoved open the door, and sprinted inside. She saw Karen on the chair, saw my daughter's arms pulled up above her head, saw the fear on her face, and without a word, she tackled Karen with everything she had. The chair tipped. Karen went down hard. The fan shook but didn't break. My daughter collapsed to the floor, her arms still bound but safe. The caregiver screamed for help, for the police, for me, and within minutes, neighbors began to rush over. Sirens filled the air. Karen tried to scramble to her feet, but the damage had already been done. The unthinkable had happened, and justice was now chasing her down. When the front door slammed open, the shock on Karen's face said everything. For one split second, she froze like a predator caught in the act. Our caregiver didn't stop to ask questions or even hesitate. She ran straight at Karen with the force of every ounce of fear and fury she could muster. The collision knocked Karen off balance, sending both of them crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs and curses. The cord slipped from the ceiling fan and fell loosely around my daughter, who collapsed to the ground, shaking and crying, still trying to understand what had just happened. Our caregiver scrambled to my daughter first, untying her wrists with trembling fingers. Her voice was frantic but full of comfort as she whispered, "You're okay now. I've got you. You're safe." My daughter clung to her like a lifeline, sobbing into her shirt, her face blotchy and red, her hands trembling. Outside, someone had already called the police. Sirens echoed down the street, growing louder by the second. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the chaos, eyes wide with disbelief as they peered through the windows and open door. I pulled up just as the first patrol car arrived, skidding into the driveway and nearly dropping the grocery bag as I saw the crowd. My legs moved before my mind caught up, sprinting toward the open doorway, heart pounding, vision narrowing, until all I could see was my daughter in the caregiver's arms and Karen pinned to the floor by an officer. My baby girl reached out for me, and I dropped to my knees, wrapping her in my arms, kissing her head, feeling her tears soak into my shirt. Karen was shouting now, spewing lies, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that she was helping with a maintenance issue. But her voice was drowned out by the officer reading her rights. Her wrists were quickly cuffed behind her back. The same hands she'd used to hurt my daughter, now bound and useless. 5 minutes. That's all it took. 5 minutes between my daughter being in danger and Karen being in handcuffs. The nightmare had ended almost as quickly as it began, but the scars were just beginning to form. The officer didn't waste time. Once Karen was on the ground, cuffed and cornered, she still tried to twist the story into something ridiculous. She said she'd been invited in, that she was helping adjust a loose ceiling fan, that she thought my daughter was in danger and was trying to help. Her voice was a mixture of desperation and defiance, like she still couldn't believe anyone would question her version of reality. But the caregiver, the bruises on my daughter's wrists, and the terrified look on her face told a different story, one that couldn't be spun into a lie. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and showed the officers the security footage from our doorbell camera. There she was, plain as day, checking to see if anyone was watching before unlocking the door and slipping inside. No knock, no permission, no hesitation. Just a woman walking into someone else's home with a purpose that couldn't be mistaken for anything good. The officer watching the video nodded grimly and asked for a copy. It wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was premeditated, deliberate. My daughter clung to me, her body trembling with aftershocks of fear, and every time she looked toward Karen, she hid her face in my chest. The officer noticed. He took one look at my little girl, and then back at Karen and said flatly, "You're under arrest for attempted assault and unlawful entry." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the officer raised a hand. "Save it for your lawyer." Neighbors stood on the sidewalk, whispering, stunned. Some held their hands over their mouths. No one rushed to defend her. No one argued or spoke in her favor. They all just watched as the woman who had terrorized so many for so long was finally taken away. In the days that followed, everything changed. Karen was booked and charged with multiple offenses: attempted murder, unlawful entry, child endangerment, and assault on a vulnerable individual. The evidence was overwhelming. Between the security footage, the caregiver's testimony, and the bruises on my daughter's arms, there was no room for doubt. Her attorneys tried to push for mental instability, tried to argue stress or confusion, but the judge wasn't having it. She was denied bail and ordered to remain in custody until trial. The HOA board acted swiftly, likely out of fear more than conscience. Karen was removed from her position immediately. The once intimidating force of the neighborhood suddenly had no power. Her name was scrubbed from the meeting notes and newsletters. Her face vanished from community pages, and the neighbors who had once looked the other way began whispering about how they'd always felt something was off. Funny how people find their voice after the threat is gone. We filed a restraining order the same week. Not that it mattered much with Karen sitting in a cell, but it gave us peace of mind. My daughter's safety became the only priority. I installed additional security cameras, reinforced the locks, and began the long process of trying to make her feel safe again in her own home. Her therapist recommended a blend of trauma counseling and art therapy, which helped more than I can explain. She stopped flinching at every sound, stopped asking if the bad lady would come back. Word spread quickly. People reached out, some apologizing, others offering support. But the one thing that echoed through the neighborhood, quietly and consistently, was relief. Relief that the woman who had bullied and intimidated so many had finally been held accountable, and that a little girl had survived something no child ever should. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in tiny, almost invisible pieces. One tear wiped away, one nightmare soothed, one small laugh that returned like a flicker of light in the dark. My daughter, who once greeted the world with open arms and endless trust, became quiet for a while. She stuck close to me, hesitated to go near the front door, and flinched whenever someone she didn't recognize walked by. But slowly, through patience, love, and countless hours of support, she began to rebuild. Her art became her refuge. At first, her drawings were dark, jagged lines and grey skies, sometimes faceless figures she didn't want to talk about. But over time, the colours returned. One afternoon, she handed me a picture she'd drawn of a butterfly with wings made of stars. "That's me," she said softly. "I was stuck, but now I'm flying again." I held it together long enough to tell her how proud I was, but when I closed the door behind me, I cried harder than I had in weeks. Therapy helped, not just for her, but for me too. We both had wounds, and while hers were more visible, mine ran just as deep. There's a specific kind of rage and helplessness that comes from knowing someone tried to hurt your child, and that you weren't there to stop it. But I also found strength in that pain, strength to advocate louder, to secure every corner of our home, to be the unwavering wall between her and any threat that might ever come near again. She's smiling more now, sleeping better, laughing again. And while we'll never forget what happened, we've decided it won't define us. Because what Karen tried to destroy wasn't broken, it was brave. And that bravery is what saved her. Thank you for hearing our story. It's not easy to speak about the darkest day of our lives, but silence only protects the abuser. If you ever feel that something isn't right, trust your instincts. Speak up, protect the vulnerable, and never assume that cruelty wears a mask you'll recognize. My daughter survived because someone acted quickly, because love fought harder than hate, and because truth refused to stay quiet. Karen thought her power made her untouchable, but in the end, justice was louder. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, monsters don't just hide in the dark. Sometimes they live next door,